And this is something that all of us are going to have to deal with at some point in our career. But before we jump into it, I wanted to do some Chamorro lessons, some audience feedback. Can everybody say, Inafa Maulik? Inafa Maulik. All right, Inafa means doing, like it's a verb. And then Maulik kind of means like good or all right. And we use it in greetings sometimes. So Sheila is also from Saipan. So I might say like, hey, Sheila, Malaka? So I'm like, hey, you doing good? And she's like, yeah, I'm doing good. In Chamorro. This is this is how we should approach power dynamics. We want to do it in a good, harmonious way, knowing how difficult it is, and some of these conversations are going to be very hard. So I'm just asking that we approach this next hour with Anafa Maulik. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves. These are some conservation warriors from all across the country. And I'm going to ask them to introduce who they are, where they're from, who they represent, your role in the coalition. I should have used my phone, but I'm a Gen Xer. So Gen Xers print stuff up. Because we're Gen X in the house. And the question I want you to answer as we get started is, what inspired you to get involved in conservation work? And can you share a memorable moment from your journey? Because I want, how we approach conservation is going to be dependent on who we are, and who we are is going to change how we do it. So look at this room. Let's all take the time to learn from each other and get to know one another. So who would like to go first? Sounds good, Sheila.
Thank you, Angelo. Hafaday is our greeting in Chamorro. Hafaday. Hafaday. And we have two indigenous recognized groups in the Northern Marianas. Carolinians, we say Tiro. 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 My name is Sheila Babalta. I'm a daughter of the Mariana Islands. We are located in the North Pacific Ocean. We are about 4 hours from Japan, and I live right next to the Marianas Trench, the deepest part in our world's ocean. So I'm a part of the Oceans group here at America the Beautiful. And I'm so grateful to be here. I'm so grateful to be here. I am the chair of the Friends of the Marianas Trench, and today I brought our flag. Thank you, Angelo. And so here in our flag, you can see that the muer, or the flower crown, represents the Carolinian people. The lattice stone in the middle represents the Chamorro people, and it is used to uphold our homes. And the star represents our unique relationship with the United States, as we are one of the 5 U.S. territories, colonies of the United States. And so that experience has been really eye-opening for me in terms of power dynamics. And so an experience that led me to ocean conservation work really was growing up around the ocean, feeling the closest I could to peace, floating in our warm waters at Pau Pau Beach. And then I got elected into office at the age of 29. Yeah. Thank you. And I went to a meeting that was held by the U.S. Department of Defense. The Navy wanted to host a community meeting, and there were 10 community members there, and they wanted to talk about their plans for training and testing in our ocean. And during that day, I learned about the 5 major plans that the U.S. military had for the Mariana Islands, and that included the movement of troops from Okinawa to Guam, because they were closing bases in Okinawa and opening another one. The MERC, the Mariana Islands Range Complex. The MIT, the Mariana Islands Training and Testing. The Divert Airfield and Exercises. And the CJMT, the Commonwealth or CNMI Joint Mariana Training. And so all these plans were shocking to me because I was just learning about them. And walking around the room, hearing about how the Navy were stewards of our oceans, stewards of the environment, it didn't make sense to me. And so that really lit a fire under my work, under my advocacy efforts. And so I'm also a co-founder of Our Commonwealth 670. We advocate for demilitarization in the Pacific, and we educate our people on demilitarization. I'm also a chair for the Micronesia Climate Change Alliance, where we do decolonization work using creative methods in reaching our communities to talk about these large issues like decolonization, demilitarization, climate change. These are not normal, words that our community uses. And so there's a lot of work to do, but spaces like this give me a lot of hope and rejuvenate my soul in the work that we're doing. And so I'm really grateful to be here. Sizus Ma'asi, Saina Ma'asi is how we say thank you. And so I will leave it there, and I look forward to our conversation on this wonderful panel. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you. Starlin, I'll just repeat again. So it's who you are, where you're from, who you represent, your role in the coalition, and then tell us a story.
Wawanan, Hosomo Wow Nuik, Nuiswan Starlin Miller, Nitskuakian Sawano Scotia, Checomat, Manewick, Iskonikan. So I'm speaking to you in Menominee today. I'm a first-line descendant of the Menominee Nation, first-line descendant of the Mohican Nation on my mother's side, and a Little Shell Chippewa tribal member out of Montana. And each of those tribes has different histories of their treaties and how their rights were recognized. The Little Shell just got recognition after 130 years of fighting for that sovereign status that they knew that they had inherently in 2020. So that was a long struggle that my great-grandparents never got to see, but I did get to see in my day. I spent about 13 years as a tribal attorney working for the Menominee Nation, the Stockbridge Nation, doing all manners of things. As tribal in-house counsel, you don't get to pick what walks in the door. I worked on Indian child welfare. I worked on purchasing lands for tribes, feed a trust, defending the homelands, prosecutions and trespassings of our homelands. And in all that work, one of the most important things that I did was partner with a nonprofit who really helped us fight the Back 40 mine. It was a proposed space on the creation space of the Menominee Nation in another state. So they're on a reservation in Wisconsin today, but their homelands were beyond those borders. And there were Native people at Earth Justice through their tribal partnerships program that I got to work with as in-house counsel. And that is how I even found out about conservation as a sector, to be honest. It had never touched my life before that. But well before that, as Sheila was talking about, I have had a connection to land. I lost my father when I was very young, about 7 years old. We've had a lot of trauma, historical trauma, present-day trauma in our families. And so it was the land that healed my family. Going to the lake lot on Menominee Reservation on Bass Lake, being able to swim, pick berries, fish, hunt. Those are all things that my kids still practice today. They're Mohican tribal members, which is a reservation that's adjacent to the Menominee Reservation as well. And so, I think I feel safe enough to share this part of my story, which is that I had a dream that brought me to conservation, a message from ancestors, if you will, that told me it was a change of times for my profession. And so that's also how I ended up in this space. I won't go into the details of that dream, but it was very powerful, and I knew that I had to make a change in my professional life to be where I am today. Today, I work for the Wilderness Society as their Senior Director of Native Lands Partnerships, and I take my job seriously in making sure that this non-Indigenous-led organization that's been around for 90 years this year is a good ally to tribal nations, supports self-determination and sovereignty, and centers equity work. And so that's part of my story.
Awesome.
Hey, everyone. Oh, that was a little loud. First, just thank all of you for allowing me to be part of the coalition, to be part of the PPC, which is the Priorities, Projects, and, Campaigns Committee. and it's just a beautiful place we're in, right? A beautiful hotel. And I'll quote the late New York Yankee and philosopher Yogi Berra when he said, "The towels are so nice in this hotel, I can barely close my suitcase." Um, but on a real note, who am I? My name is Jerry Otero. I grew up a Chicano kid in Western Colorado. That's where I'm from. That's where I live now. Uh, I think so much about conservation. I think of family. And I want to acknowledge that I have such privilege to be here because I often think of all of the shoulders that we are standing on. All of the people that currently fight, that have fought, that have struggled. I think of my parents. I think of my grandparents. I think of all the people that have put in so much time and effort, that were born in injustice, lived with injustice, and passed away with injustice, never getting to actually even be up here to talk about what progress we've made or things that we could do. And I think that's really important because I see a lot of younger faces here. I see a lot of other faces, that people that have had experiences. I think that's really important because, for me, that's what motivates me. When we talk about why are we here, what are we doing, to me, it's saying I have the privilege now because of the people that have fought before me to allow me to be here, to say something, to be able to speak truth to power in certain ways, to go out and work in conservation where others didn't have that opportunity. And so I'm very grateful for that. I feel very privileged to be here for that. That's a big motivation for me. My day job is I am the Ledge and Policy Director for the Grand Canyon Trust. We're based out of Arizona, but we work across the Four Corners states on a whole variety of issues. I'm also serve as I was the previous co-lead for the public lands group for this coalition, and I'm currently the policy chair for Next 100 Colorado. And Next 100 Colorado is a group of all people of color in Colorado working on environmental justice issues across the state. So I wear a couple of those hats on a regular basis. And so I think about why I'm here, and I think back of these kind of really pivot points in my life of saying I could have went left or I could have went right. And I'm sure we all have those, right, of how we got here, why we're here. And I think of getting out of school, and I applied for an internship for a senator in his first term, and his name happened to be Ken Salazar. And so I was an intern for his office, right? And I told my parents, if I get a job here, I'll work here for 1 year. And I ended up staying almost 10 years in the US Senate. And I worked all these different issues, right? I worked immigration and energy and housing and veterans, poverty issues, public lands and energy in Colorado. And I worked all the way through 2014 for Mark Udall, and he did not win re-election. And I had a real thinking about what I wanted to do. And I realized that conservation had so much ground to be gained because I would go to meetings and there weren't people that looked like me, even though that my parents, my family instilled these values in me. I wasn't part of those conversations. My family wasn't part of those conversations, even though we had hundreds of years in the West working on the lands, working and understanding water, hunting and fishing, but we weren't part of these conversations. And so I realized these are places for us to work. And I was able to get a job. I worked for NPCA for a few years, and now I'm at the trust. But it also has lured in different people in my community. My younger brother, who's a great leader in his own right, works for the Wilderness Society as a director of equitable funding. I think I got that right. But it just shows you, right? It's one step, one door to be opened to get you in, and you bring a lot of other people along with you, and I'm very proud of that. And so that's something that really motivates me. And so thank you for that. It's a little bit of my life story and a little bit of motivation of why I'm here.
Thank you. Before we talk to our next speaker, I feel like somebody's snoring. Is somebody snoring? Is there a microphone?
Our stories are so boring.
What is that?
I can hear that.
They stopped, so they might have woke up.
I think they might be awake now. Perfect. Great story, Jerry.
It wasn't me, I promise. Buenas tardes, good afternoon. Adrián Angulo, I'm with the Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project. On the coalition, I serve as a co-lead on the wildlife work group with my compatriota Jewel. Also helped to stand up a new work group that we're happy to introduce. the Legacy Lands Working Group. I see my compatriota Kenya over there. I don't know if Christina's in the room. So lots of love in the room with different work group leads. I'm also on the Backbone team. I also clean up after folks, so just anything you need. But it is truly an honor and a privilege to be here. Thank you, Jerry, for starting with that note of appreciation. I wanted to share a quick story, and I guess the reason how I came to conservation. I am a first-generation American citizen, like a lot of folks in the United States, and born with the accidental privilege of American citizenship. And I call that out, and I say that because conservation work is itself a privilege, as much as we want to sit up here and say, oh, we need to get paid for what we're doing, this, that, and the other. Being able to do the work and not lose your life for it in the United States is a privilege. Don't get me wrong. There are defenders that, have lost their lives, have been prosecuted, are being prosecuted. And in the United States, it is a relatively safe job. So I think that being able to sit and stand on that privilege is a consequence of being born with the accidental privilege of citizenship. And so I take that very seriously. And I came to conservation immediately after college, got involved in politics, and started running campaigns. And I got involved with the land commissioner race. And so in 2016, 2017, there was this awesome idea to change the way that our southern border was closed off to Mexico with the installation of a bollard wall. Great idea that just the implementation just didn't work. Well, in one of those visits to the southern border, I met all sorts of folks from the southern part of the state, Texas, Arizona, all coming together around not immigration, but the jaguar. It wasn't what this was going to mean to people, but what this was going to mean to the jaguar. And it was just such an odd moment for me, coming from it as like an immigrant and thinking about it from a humanitarian issue, but the perspective of like, don't do this, the jaguar will be severely impacted, and wildlife and migration routes will be severely impacted. And I just thought, folks aren't talking to each other the way that they ought to be talking to each other. And so I turned my views from simply politics to this conservation space where folks, a lot of white-led organizations were talking about jaguars. A lot of other folks were talking about migration, and immediately got interested in the storytelling of both of those groups and how you kind of marry those two to combine what does migration look like for all of us. How are we like the jaguar? I can imagine. Anyway, I'll stop the story there. But that's how I came to conservation, and I think that was
it, man. Thank you.
That was it. All right,
Terrific.
perfect.
All right, so now you know our panel, and now we can actually get into the topic. I feel like almost every conservation initiative starts by two people drinking a beer and complaining about something. And this panel also started very similar. I was talking to one of the leaders of the coalition. I was complaining about a certain other coalition that I'm aware of, and she was saying, "Oh, you think that's bad? Let me tell you about this funder that I'm looking at the person. I'm going to try not to look at them. Let me tell you about this funder that I'm dealing with, and we should do an entire hour complaining about all of that stuff." I said, no, it was actually her who made it her. Sorry, I'm giving you away. I'm sorry. How do we actually turn that positive? How can we talk about the tools and the techniques that we can use? Because I was just in the other room, and Alex gave a great presentation talking about the inequities all across conservation. But how do we begin to push back against that? How do we build our own power to address these immense power imbalances, whether, so some of you are young women of color, and maybe you're working for a big NGO, and all of the people at the top are like old white dudes named Tom, Pete, and Mike. I'm part of a federal advisory committee. There are 3 people of color on it, and there's 3 white guys named Pete. Right? So it's like the white guys named Pete are doing better than all of Black America when it comes to advising the government on how to deal with ocean issues. But it's not just internal. Maybe you're a small NGO and there's power dynamics when you're dealing in a coalition with a big NGO, or maybe you're a small island dealing with the United States Navy. You have your indigenous knowledge and they have nuclear weapons. How do you deal with that, Sheila? So I will start with that. So you brought up in your story about how you first got involved with conservation was when you went to a public hearing with 10 people. So how do you get an agency as powerful as the U.S. Navy to listen to your community and not just listen to them, but then implement the concerns that you may have?
We take a deep breath first.
We're going to start light.
And the first thing I did was really connect with advocates already working on the issue. The militarization of the Mariana Islands is not a new issue, even though it was the first time for me to learn about it. And so the pieces that I wear today, this is a ligatutur. It is a traditional Carolinian piece. It's made by Auntie Senta Kaipat. She is one of our first staunch advocates for demilitarization. She was a former congresswoman. She's an artist, she's a singer, storyteller, directing a film, early 90s, about decolonization, and she died 2 years ago of cancer. Our community has a large, disproportionate impact, negative health impacts because of the military's presence, and there aren't enough data, white papers to really prove that. One of our sister islands, Farallon de Mendeniza, has been bombed for almost 50 years. The lease is coming up, and I'm really paying close attention to that because nobody is talking about this lease. One of the 5 plans that I mentioned, it has moved our government to work with the DOD, and the DOD securing 2/3 of our sister island Antinian, and our sister island Guam, because Guam is part of the Mariana chain. She is our sister island at the southernmost end of our chain, and she is carrying the brunt of the militarization with all of the military branches having a base on Guam. And so our strategic location has always been ingrained in us that is the value we bring to the United States. And I realized that we had to organize. We had to mobilize our people. And when a public comment period was open, the people in the Marianas submitted over 30,000 comments, which was like unbelievably unheard of. The DOD was not ready for that because they have to respond to these letters, and that is the law, right? And so they have yet to complete their response, and so it has delayed further militarization, but we are still in the process of these discussions. And so the women in our community, have led this conversation because it is a very complex and difficult conversation to lead, to have. We have one of the highest per capita of enlisted servicemen and women in the US military. So I have cousins and uncles and aunties, and they are currently serving. We have veterans as a part of our community, and with the history of the war, there is a narrative of gratitude towards the United States for saving us. And so working with the youth is what brings me joy. They get it immediately, right? When we talk about protecting our homelands, conserving our natural resources. And so when I was in office, I adopted a youth center, and that was because, I was part of the minority, and it was in one of the most impoverished but traditional villages on our island. and started engaging with our youth. And Project Hope came on my radar, and that was a program being offered by Friends of the Mariana Trench. And so these kids wanted to participate but could not get there. Public transportation is an issue. Gas prices right now are at around $5.90 a gallon. And so, parents were not going to drive their kids to this ocean conservation program. So then I worked out a deal with the rental company and would drive the kids to the program myself every Monday. And it was such a great grounding and eye-opening experience to spend quality time with these kids, on the drive down, 30 minutes, on the island of Saipan. We're 14 miles long, 7 miles wide. And they would share stories with me. And at the end of the program, many of these kids, went into the fields of conservation. We had students there from the college. It was an ecosystem that the Friends of the Mariana Trench built where we incorporated traditional knowledge. We had ocean elders there. We had college students there from the Natural Resources Club. We had scientists that came in who looked like us, who were local scientists, to share the information about our home, place-based information. I grew up not knowing anything about the Mariana Trench. I learned about the 50 states and the Great Lakes, and I could not believe that I didn't know anything about the Mariana Trench. And so from that experience, I was recruited and now serve as the chair of Friends of the Mariana Trench. And so, it's programs like that, it's nonprofit organizations like that that have visions of bridging gaps and bringing together traditional knowledge with Western science, creating spaces for the community to come and contribute and feel that we are fulfilling a purpose. And so I'm really grateful for organizations, nonprofit leaders, and Angelo as a founding member of Friends of the Mariana Trench. So let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Your story about just what we learned in school back home, all of our textbooks have apples and oranges, but on our trees are guavas and mangoes. So it's just everything is just a complete disconnect. So you mentioned organizing, and you talked about organizing children and organizing women. Anybody else want to chime in on organizing communities?
Well, a lot of what Sheila said resonated with me about truth and knowledge, and, ensuring that even in our own communities that we're learning the true history, and not just within our communities, but for instance, with the Wilderness Society, making sure that our leadership, our board, our staff are learning truth about history, about Native nations, about the Indian boarding school, which Therese was talking about today. A lot of people don't realize those truths. And I'll share my own story, just being a lost teenager, and not really seeing where I fit in the world, having lost my father at a young age. I didn't find myself until I started to look for my ancestors, and I realized, wait a second here, I have chiefs in my family on both sides, maternal and paternal. I've got buffalo hunters, I've got veterans. What is my responsibility to my ancestors? And also when I had children, it becomes even more apparent, I'm gonna work harder, because you find your place, you find your humility, and you find your purpose. And I think that's what makes the difference in the work, is you're doing it not for yourself, but with community and for community.
Thank you. So, you're talking about colonialism, you're talking about imperialism. There's been, historical injustices in both of your communities and all of our communities. We do need to address those. And as Adrian, I was wondering if you had any ideas on how do we begin to repair some of those relationships?
Yeah, great question. I don't know.
Jerry.
No, but
Hopefully nobody falls asleep this time.
I was gonna say, I think that when the times I've seen, a big green try, and I'll share a story because it failed hilariously almost. We do need to start from a place of acceptance, right, and atoning and all of that. But one of my first jobs outside of New Mexico was for a big green. My title was literally Hispanic Outreach Manager. I won't name the big green, but we'll just call it Big Green. And at great like personal expense of credibility, like my own credibility with like my community that I had built. They agreed to like bring on this big green to this community event that we were having, and it was centering justice, centering fishing, and creating access for folks to get more comfortable in the outdoors and shooting rifles. And it was going to be like a beautiful day out in the field, getting to know one another. You have like hunters with artists, with curanderas, and it was this beautiful cross-cultural intersectional coalition, kind of something like this, and we were all going to get together. Well, my Big Green organization came to me and said, hey, we have funding for this kind of thing. Why don't you guys host the event on like our social medias, and then we'll leverage our funding to like really blast it and make sure that it's a success. So I get all the messaging put together and on the back end, and we put it out there. A couple days later, I start getting calls from the coalition, and it's like, hey, there's nothing in here about justice and advocacy and like civil rights and like the bread and butter of why we're doing this event. It's all just whitewashed. It just says conservation, outdoors, sportsmanship. And I was shocked. And so I called Big Green and I say, hey, what's going on? Oh, well, we don't do justice. That's not our brand. We don't do that kind of work. And neither do you. You do Hispanic outreach. And so I had to go back to the coalition, right? And it's like, guys, if you kick me out, right? Stop being my friend, unfollow me, block me, Jesus. Por mi culpa, por mi gran culpa, right? Like, oh my God. And I ended up not fully participating in the event and shortly left Big Green. And that was the story. But I think one thing when you're trying to repair from the perspective of an organization like that has not only not recognized that they stand on a historic injustice and then continue to perpetuate that by severely tokenizing, again, propagating those harms, there's just no hope, especially when Big Green continue to leverage relationships and continue to leverage access to policy places, to just blindly, kind of like a bull in a china shop, just keep doing what they're doing. And because we're still giving them power. But I know that part of this panel was like, oh, give us some actionable steps to like make it better. Step number 1, quit. And do so with reasons why. And I did that, and I gave some feedback like, hey, maybe don't put Hispanic in the name. Hey, maybe this should be paid 20 or 30 times, or sorry, maybe you should add 20 or 30,000 to the salary. And maybe it should be more integrated strategically into what you're doing rather than this kind of offshoot little thing. 3 months after I left, that's kind of what they did. And sure enough, it was a much more sustainable outreach program. Not interested in working with Big Green again, but they sort of listened. And I think that something actionable that we can all take from that is, maybe if you can't quit, you definitely have to be able to like speak your truth and say and name the harm. Hey, that was terrible, and I lost a lot of friends and credibility, and you can't just opt out of doing justice work, especially when you're named after a president that caused incredible injustices in this country.
I'd like to respond to that. Quitting, you should quit. I've quit jobs. I've been fired from jobs too. We need you in conservation, right?
I agree, and I think it's a spectrum. We need Indigenous-led organizations, BIPOC-led organizations. We also need people inside of these old institutions to help, steer the sleeping giant, so they don't crush us as we do the work on the ground in frontline communities. So we all need to work together. We need to have these conversations and organize, like we've been hearing all day long, so that we can have the paradigm shift that we're all seeking. I think there was something like 14 CEOs turned over in Big Green conservation this year. And I don't know what the numbers are for BIPOC-led organizations at this point, but it'd be interesting to find out next year if we filled any of those positions with BIPOC leaders. And if not this year, let's keep being hopeful and make that change that we want to see. I'm hopeful, but I think we need the spectrum of everybody doing the work across all organizations and then talking and working together.
Green 2.0 is in the back table, and they have the report card coming out in December, so we'll actually have the answer to that question.
Yeah, and I don't want to be misunderstood. I didn't say quit the movement. I just meant like quit the place that'll probably be stuck.
I'll give you a fun tip. Use the CC on your email and send a Dear Colleagues letter. I'll tell you the short version of this story, but I told a reporter that we needed to decolonize conservation, and my former employer was very unhappy about that, and I was about to be fired, and I was very upset. We were having meetings, memos were being written, and I said, "Well, fuck this, I'm gonna quit." And that was actually where I started. Was I'm gonna quit. But I said, I'm not a wealthy person, but I was like, all right, how am I gonna quit and pay my mortgage next month? So I said, I'm gonna make the decision on Monday. And over the course of the weekend, I thought about it and I talked to some friends, and my resignation letter turned into a Dear Colleagues letter that proposed 3 ways to actually fix the problem that was at this organization. I CC'd the CEO and everybody between them and my manager, and at this organization it was 7 people, and then I CC'd the entire organization. Oh my God, did that light a fire under their ass. Sunlight, it will kill the germs. So that's one thing to do is we can't let these things happen in the shadows.
Did you quit or leave?
I quit. That was in April. I quit in October. So, but I got a great new job. So yeah, you can't, take care of yourself. You got to take care of your health. You got to take care of your economics. You got kids. You got family. You got to take care of that. And people. I wish conservation was more welcoming to people like us. But you see why, why you're here. There's a reason you're here. And it's you're gonna have difficulties. But the people in this room, we are your community, and we're here to support you. And so the people that you meet, before you quit, call somebody. And maybe there's other ideas. So I sent an email, but maybe other people have other ideas of things that you could have done in similar situations.
Well, we're organizing, right now we're calling it the Alliance for Indigenous Environmental Stewardship. I think we did a chat GPT on that. My friend Joel wanted to call us the Big Green Indians. We didn't like that name. So right now we're organizing. There was a big hiring of Indigenous staff across conservation after No DAPL, and you can feel really lonely and isolated. Sometimes you're the only one, right, within a big green organization. So there's just this need uniquely to reach out and create a community. So that's what we did. We've had our first summit this past year. We're going to be doing a second summit. We're doing monthly meetings so that Indigenous staff can share knowledge. It's not about scarcity. There's enough for everybody, right? Because everybody wants to have the newfangled co-stewardship answer, co-management answer. No, we can share our knowledge. We can build off of the stuff that people before us did and make it better. So that's the goal of that group. I think creating your community is a fantastic lesson. This is a community that I'm going to be talking about with that group, and we just keep building those partnerships and networks to make us stronger as a group, I think.
That's awesome. Thank you. I want to get to Jerry. You're kind of like me, like you've been in both worlds, right? You worked in the Senate for 10 years, then you go back home. I'm like the other way right now. Like I was back home, now I'm in DC. What was that like, man? How do you get the government and some of these big NGOs and the funders, how do you get them to understand some of the issues back at home, knowing that you lived in that world for many years?
Well, that's a great question. I just want to talk a little bit first, though, about the cycle of quitting, right? I mean, it's easier said than done to say, oh, just quit, right? There's a lot that goes into that and why. And sometimes quitting feels like you're giving up instead of saying, I'm going to stay and stick this out and try and make change. I had the opportunity to work for 6 years for a large conservation organization, and I was picked as one of the chairs of the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Initiative at that organization, and served as one of the co-leads for that for 3 years. And part of that, there was this like facilitated training essentially about Jedi, which I always said, I'm a Jedi master already. I don't necessarily need the training for that, but okay. Joking aside, I remember the facilitator drew on the board. He said this, like he said, here's what's going to happen. Here's this circle. It's going to happen to your organization. You're going to have people that will identify the problems. They will be pushing for change, the change makers. And then step 3 will be they'll leave. And then they'll make small incremental changes that will happen over years that will probably frustrate you. Maybe some of them you'll applaud. And at the time I said, well, why would you leave? And, I ended up leaving. And I had a better opportunity, right? There's a dual benefit there. But you don't realize those cycles, right, when you're in them. And they're difficult choices to make. And so I just want to underline, like, there's a lot of people like all of us here that have went through these career changes that we go through. I would ask that we should think more closely about how we can support each other in these career moves, because we've all stared that in the face. We've all stared, well, what about my insurance, my mortgage, your rent, right? You may help family members, right? Not everybody comes into these situations with the economic benefit to say, well, maybe you help your mom or a parent. And those are important things. We don't all have that privilege to say we can do those things. And so I just want to acknowledge that and understand that these are jobs that oftentimes are motivated by our own emotion, but they're also our jobs. That's what they pay us to do. And so those are really tough choices. But living in both of those worlds, I grew up, I think of my own, I go back to my family. My grandfather, believe it or not, was born in 1900 out in southern Colorado. And he started out, he was a shepherd, right? You think, okay, there's a shepherd. My dad dropped out of high school because he got promoted working in the fields, and he was a foreman, right? So he was out and he dropped out of high school, right? He goes back to high school. My dad is one of 13 kids. He then becomes one of the first Spanish-speaking attorneys in Western Colorado, right? So you think of that trajectory of my grandfather to my grandfather, or my grandfather to my dad to me, of saying where I am and the things that I represent. And the ability to then go to work in the U.S. Senate, of a place to say there wasn't many people that represented those backgrounds, especially from rural areas. And so how do you get that case to be made? Well, part of it is the history, right? That expertise. We all have that lived expertise, cultural expertise that I think is really valuable. Sometimes they want to compartmentalize that expertise, and I think we should push very much vehemently against that and incorporate into the policies, not just as a separate piece. But also, one of the things that I've found, though, now is not just that cultural expertise, but I think in conservation, sometimes people don't like to have this conversation, but it's the economic might of people of color in this country, the cultural impact a lot of times we talk about environmental justice and we say, well, this is a poor community. This is an at-risk community. This is a vulnerable community. And that may be true in the metrics that they're judged, but we are much more than that. We are intelligent. We are rich in culture. We are rich in being leaders and innovators and artists and musicians and all of these different ways that drive so much of our countries in so many different ways, in our inventiveness. And that's something we should be proud of and not give up. And that's a thing that, to me, I understand we breathe worse air and drink clear, not as clean a water. We need to be proud of what we can represent and continue to push that in all of our policies. And so the reason I say that is that you look at the economic numbers, and I'm just speaking for the Latino community here, because of course I can speak for all Latinos. We're all the same, right? Of course. But joking aside, if you look at the numbers, right, if you say, well, this is an environmental justice issue, the Latino community in the United States alone is the 5th largest economy on earth. Bigger than Indians' economy, bigger than UK, bigger than France, the 5th largest economy. It is the fastest growing number of entrepreneurs. It is the fastest growing number of new businesses. It is, by all these metrics, blowing them out of the water. There's nearly 70 million Latino people in this country, right? And so the issue isn't just saying, how do you then atone for past environmental injustices? And yes, we should absolutely do that. But also the case we have to make is this is a math number. This is an equation. Say, if you want to win, if we want to get to 30 by 30, you have to include us. It won't happen. We're not going to monument our way to 30 by 30. We just can't do it. We have to do the things in our communities and incorporate the fact that you can't avoid us. And no matter who's president, Latinos, we're not going anywhere. So you're going to have to deal with us. But when you look at those numbers, the reason I note that is if you look at the numbers, we talked earlier about 1% of indigenous, or 1% of the funding goes to indigenous communities. It's the same for Latinos. It's the same for the African American Black community. It's far less than that for Asian Americans. So what do we make up? 5% maybe of the 100% goes to all of us. And so we have to make the case. This isn't just about the emotion and the history, but also the current economic state, the viability, the strategic investment, and also the support. If you look at the polling numbers for people of color compared to their counterparts, they have a far wider margin of supporting environmental and conservation measures in this country. So it's polling, it's math, it's economics. We have to invest. And so when you say make the case to an elected official, it isn't just saying do something good for brown people. It's saying you need to do something good for your state, and this is how you do it, because we are taking a larger and larger portion of the economic pie in a good way. We're creating businesses. We're doing so much for the community. This is beyond just saying this is good for us. Let's do that out of the goodwill, because we found that environmental justice orders have been around for how long? 30, 40 years. Goodwill hasn't got us there. So we have to continue to make a much more stronger, cohesive case that goes beyond just conservation and into using economic leverages to get us there.
Can I add real quick? Because I've been in those worlds, and I just want to share that politicians care about getting reelected, right? And when I was in office, when we would close the door, politicians' knees were shaking because of the people power. Like, I saw that firsthand, that if you organize well and you show up, like what was mentioned today about organizing and showing up, that energy being in person is so powerful and scary. It can move policy, it can move people. And so I realized that was a gap in my community. I decided not to run for re-election this past election and move back into the space of organizing to be with my community. And so right now I'm working on reclaiming an abandoned shopping mall in my village. It was a failed development because they did not center the community. It was built for the tourists because tourism is our #1 industry. And so we need spaces where people can gather just like this. We need spaces, we need safe spaces for our communities to have these conversations, to organize, to like get enthusiastic and excited, because in a community where you feel disempowered and disconnected, we have the most expensive flight in the world from Saipan to Guam. It's a 30-minute flight, and it's the most expensive flight per mile at $600 for a 30-minute flight. And so, you know, it can be felt in all areas of our lives. And the more work we do to connect one another, to have these conversations, to build community, you know, I believe so much in the power of people. And so I'm really just so grateful to be here in this space with all you powerful people. Thanks, Angela.
Hooray. All right, I'm going to summarize this real quick. I'm going to ask one final question, and then I'll open it up to Q&A. So like what I heard, like some of the tools that we have is we're going to build community among ourselves, and we are going to support one another. If you're thinking about quitting and you don't want to quit, you're going to call me or Adrian. If you're thinking about quitting and you want to quit, you're going to call Jerry. The other thing I heard is that we are going to recognize the power that we have within our communities, and we are going to organize those communities, and we are going to wield that power to change the world. So my final question for all of y'all, then we'll open it up to the group. So sorry, go ahead. No reply all. Use the CC, but don't hit reply all. Thank you. You could have said that into the microphone. You can say. He also suggests that you can like whisper it into somebody's ear so that they don't shoot the messenger, and then like the messenger gets shot. Thank you for like acting that out. That was great, terrific. So we're in this. But America the Beautiful, we're all about 30 by 30, and we're about Justice 40. So just my final question to you is, in the next 5 years, how do we insert community and organizing into a measurable goal? Like, how do we actually do it? Like, how do we know we did it or not?
To me, what success would look like, well, you know, I know that the numbers are important, but success looks like Indigenous youth leading. That's what I think. I think it looks like self-determination, tribal nations leading the work, having the solutions, and some of our nonprofit organizations supporting those solutions. First Foods is a good example. Again, it's like one of those things where it's like, that's not conservation work. Well, yes, it is conservation work. We have to do that hard work of basically translating language between these spaces so that people understand these are conservation values at the end of the day. So to me, I think if we have more youth leading, more women leading, and these are things that elders have prophesized in my community, that women are going to be leading this movement, that it's about humility, it's about working together. So I'm very hopeful for us meeting our goals.
I think there's two layers. First, I would say there's a direct impact in that we'll see more acres conserved, protection of water and oceans, and hopefully the earth isn't heating up at the rate that it has been, right? I mean, that's part of what we're all doing. That's the very first thing. We'll see in communities improvement to access to parks and green space. We'll see all of those things measurably improved, and I believe firmly that we can make those improvements with this group and with partners and allies. But I think it'll also have a reverberant effect in that when you look at the numbers of people who visit national parks, when you look at the number of people who work in national parks, when you look at the people who work in the BLM, when you look at the president's cabinet and who works within each one of those agencies, when you think about communities that when you say the defining characteristic of where toxic waste is dumped and stored is determined by race and zip code, that will change. When we think about who breathes clean air, who gets access to clean water, who has access to transportation in the right way, and you say, well, transportation, but where the roads get built, where our schools get built, where our parks get built, where we go to the hospital, where we have access to the internet. And you say, well, how does the internet have anything to do with us? It has everything to do with us when we talk about intersectionality. So to me, it'll say We have the first impact, that is our job to get the work done that we're all doing. Let's go to work. But the reverberant effect will have all those different layers. When I see myself in the interpretation of our parks and public lands that has not been there for so long, I'll say that's a win. When I see all these different places of across the country that are in close proximity to energy development, and that energy policy is now equitable, now we're making progress. So there's all of those things there that I think will be important to all of us, but also importantly, who's leading these efforts in our country, right? We see so often one cabinet secretary, and then you say, well, who else is there? I hope to see Angelo is going to be the new Department of Interior Secretary, I think is what you were going for.
Oh, God.
But on a real note, that's what we need to see, right? There's so many brilliant people in this room. We have that opportunity, and that to me is also part of the win. It's 30 by 30, but the 30 is going to go all these different directions. So I'm really, really optimistic about that. Not saying in any way that this isn't a difficult task ahead of us, but I think we've got a great team assembled, and that's to me what success looks like.
Yes, yes, and yes. I just want to add to representation, right? To your point about representation. Where is American Samoa? Where is Guam? Where is the Virgin Islands? There are 5 U.S. colonies, and it's been such a struggle to fight for representation, to have our voices heard. The election's coming up, and we don't vote for U.S. president. So we don't have a voting delegate in Congress. And that conversation just is a big one that we're not having enough of. And so I am also part of a group called Right to Democracy. We are about a year now in formation. We gathered for the first time last November in New York City, where all 5 U.S. territories came together. Government officials, philanthropists, leaders, community leaders, organizers, and the U.S. colonies, the territories, we connected and we talked about things like conservation and voting rights and representation. And so, these spaces are critical, these conversations are critical. And if the space is not going to be made for us by our colonizer, by the United States government, then we have to create the space ourselves, right?
Amen.
Yeah. Yes. And I think we need to bring some Gen Z energy to
I thought I
30
did
by
that. I
30.
don't do that.
I don't pretend to understand the Gen
You're
Z.
saying I'm sus?
Sus vibes. But wherever we get to in 5 years, in 30 by 30, if we get to 17%, 20, 25, 35, whatever, I think that building the campaigns and the machinations to have these big, robust, community-driven campaigns, wherever we are, as long as they're community homegrown and community led, we're going to be all right, because we're going to be all right. And Gen Z don't take no shit from nobody. So as long as they're the county commissioners and they're the legislators and they are in city council, I just scared myself a little bit, but I think that we'll be okay, because the kids are all right.
Kids are all right. I think we had time for one question. 3 questions. No. Okay, we have an announcement to make.
I'm going to run the microphone and kick us off with a real quick question. So I think a lot of folks in this room identify as disruptors in some way, that you've disrupted patterns of behavior in this movement, and you're working with others to do that. And we started this coalition together to show that there's a lot more of us than it feels like sometimes when you're doing it alone. So as someone who's been in some of those big institutions with at least 2 folks on stage, and folks who are having these conversations with funders, or you are a smaller organization working with partners that have more resources, can you tell us about a time that you heard the word no, but you knew the answer was unjust, and you pushed back. How did you do that? And how would you advise others in the room to do that successfully, or at least quit and make a statement?
I can think of a time. So in conservation, long before I got there, Land Water Conservation Fund is like celebrated, permanency, $900 million, passed legislation, woohoo. But when you start to look at the numbers of tribal access, I just asked a simple question, well, are tribes accessing it? And nobody could answer that question. They didn't know the answer. And so we did a study with NAFPO, National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, and a researcher. And we talked directly to tribal employees, nations from the tribes. We took 6 months to do that, and we issued a report, and we found that they're not accessing this permanent fund of $900 million. And it was kind of like the fly in the milk, because everybody wants to celebrate LWCF. They don't want to hear about the negativity of it. But how I managed that was very diplomatically. It's like, yes, it's a win, and we've got more work to do. So join us. Join our efforts to rectify this wrong, because everybody sees that it's wrong, especially when we're asking tribal nations and indigenous people to share their knowledge and to help us solve climate crisis. They need to have access to these funds. And so we're doing that work, and it's a long haul. There's short-term, medium-term, long-term steps. But helping the tribes be center in that conversation and not have solutions from NGOs, big greens, be the answer. Instead, elevating the solutions that come from Indian country is the way to do it. And we've actually changed some minds. So we're getting funders that are interested in that work and supporting us and pushing us to move forward. So we appreciate it. And I think that's a really good example of it, where it's really hard to raise it.
I see they're about to play music to kick us off the stage. Can you play "Power" by Kanye West to take us off the right way? So I try not to give it away. I had a job, and there was a policy that I wanted implemented at this job because I felt what they were doing was kind of screwing the employees, and I knew that some of the other organizations already had this policy. So I did a survey. I did research. I started with research. I did a survey of the other organizations in our place and found out what their policies were, put it together in a little report, told all my coworkers about it, and then presented it to management. And management had to implement it because everybody else was doing it, and all the staff now had proof that we were the only ones not doing it. So I feel like I've always been a campaigner at heart, not just in my communities, but also for myself and for my coworkers.
Yes. The key, I think, is that as much as it's difficult to adopt it, but it is putting papers together or memos together and building consensus and allies to support those papers. And then once that paper gets out, that report gets out, the sky is the limit about what can happen and the shifts that can happen so quickly, internally at your organization and externally. Right.
We're gonna be late.
Just ignore Hoover. Nobody's looking at it anyways. Don't worry about the times.
All right. Y'all, thank you so much. I got love for y'all and the work that y'all are doing. Thank you for that. Y'all talk about power dynamics, and you talk about the way I'm looking at it is a larger organization and us. And you also talked about community work. I'd love to hear if there's a story about power dynamics in a community that you wanted to help and how those power dynamics did not want the help and how it failed. And then a statement that I'm just thinking about when we talked about Latinos being this large growing population, conversation throughout the conference that I'd love to have is if there's any thought and conversation around not all Latinos are in agreement with what we want to do. And if we're growing in these numbers, what are we doing to make sure that we don't perpetuate and continue on these things that we're trying to change now? So that's a conversation for later. I just want to say it out loud. But that first one, power dynamics within a community. An example, going to my community, talking about conservation, not the issue that they're focused on. Hustling, making money, taking care of their family. I don't want to hear it. It takes time. So I know there's successes, but there are some where we don't want you here. And I'd love to hear if that is happening and other people are experiencing that.
Sheila's smirking because she has experience with big NGOs.
It's a really complicated conversation in my community. So let's see, where do we start? Angelo.
I was the big NGO.
Angelo was the big NGO. The Friends of the Mariana Trench led the initiative for the Mariana Trench Marine National Monument, and it was a process that was very divisive for our community. The big NGO came in, worked with some community leaders, and then imposed this idea of conservation is what the community felt like, right? And there was a timeline. And we don't like being rushed when this big decision on conservation and protecting a large part of our ocean is now brought to the table. You're going to rush and give us 60 days to comment, right? When we have so many other things on our plate already. And to make matters worse, it took 15 years to get the management plan because it's still something we're healing from today. Communities, we remember the harm, we remember the pain. And it takes a lot of consistent conversations. It takes a lot of clearing misinformation, right? And that looks like spending time in your community. It looks like having the conversations at the picnic table, going on the radio, printing op-eds, gathering lots of allies like the National Ocean Protection Coalition. I just want to give a shout out to Amy Kenny, the executive director who's here. She's been an amazing ally in the process with supporting community engagement, where the community is leading the engagement. And you are uplifting their voice. And so conservation, indigenous rights to fishing, the demilitarization work and the decolonization work, it's all intersecting, and climate change is coming at us at a rapid pace. I've been home now for 8 years, and we've experienced 3 super typhoons and a number of regular typhoons and the pandemic. So there's a lot of disruption along the way. And I'm an Obama leader. I was part of the Asia Pacific Obama Leaders Program. We're the first cohort. And when we convened in Malaysia, I got to ask President Obama a question because this experience of feeling like you're at the table with Goliath can be so overwhelming. And so I wasn't prepared to ask him a question. We were told that he wasn't going to open the floor for questions, but he did. And I raised my hand anyway, and I gave the example of militarization in the Pacific. The Pacific Islands, we hold the brunt of defense, of national security. This conversation around national security, what that looks like for the United States does not look like the same thing for us. And so climate change is our biggest threat. China is not our biggest threat. China is actually a tourist market that we invite to the Marianas, But I say that to share that President Obama, he gave a really thoughtful answer, and he shared that that when you're faced with big institutions, big powers, what we want to do is raise awareness. You want to gather allies. And you want to unify your voice. So unifying voices is a difficult part. And I am currently on that stage too, like consistently with my community. And so advocacy, space, that all ties in. Yeah. I want to share that.
Thank you, Sheila. Well, I think we have time for one more question.
Oh, we have one.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Erandi Treviño with the Raíces Collab Project. Thank you for your presentation. I guess I want to talk about the Hispanic point on representation, because I feel like all the minority groups face something very similar where we're just not visible. In Houston, I come from Houston. I'll be brief. But I come from Houston, and a lot of our communities are being sacrificed. They're being sacrificed for the cost of oil and gas, petrochemicals, plastics, right? And a lot of us, like, it is an oppressive environment to live in. You know, I've been told, like, by a U.S. member of Congress, well, we're not perfect, but our life expectancy is longer than in Mexico, which is where I was born. But it's not, because it's around 54, right? And so we have a lot of things in common with different of the communities that are speaking today. Anyway, I don't know. I just really wanted to appreciate the fact that you brought that up, because I talk about this a lot, that we're not visible. We're the largest, like, minority, if you will, and yet if you go on Netflix or Hulu and you scroll through, you're not going to see us. You're going to see us, like, maybe after a few rows. And so I think that it doesn't matter if we disagree on a lot of things, because we agree on things that really matter. And if you, anytime I'm in a group with Latinos, and there are things that we have in common and that we're mad about and frustrated about, that's the place to start, to just start telling our stories and to start sharing those things, because we have commonalities. It doesn't matter if we're different. We're all little different insects in the garden. We just need to be, you know, our best selves. That's all that.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And even though you and I come from different parts of the country, I from rural Colorado and you're from Houston, one of the threads there, the common threads, is oil and gas. Where I come from, there's a lot of oil and gas operations, have been for a very long time, especially in the Four Corners states. New Mexico, I think, is one of the highest producing oil and gas states in the country. Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, those are all big in oil and gas. And to speak to this gentleman's point of terms of where we failed or issues that we've had, I think it relates to your question as well, in that I worked a lot on energy policy, and you would go to communities where you were saying, let's try and do something more nuanced that would require some protections or accountability in oil and gas operations. And there was vehement opposition to that, because they viewed any step in between a positive way of life that comes in economics as opposition to their way of life. And in some ways that is true. Both my grandparents, one of them was a coal miner, one of them was a copper miner in Arizona. Were they pro-energy and against conservation measures? No, but that's the only job that they could provide for their families. And so you have to see how that impacts communities. You look at tribal nations, and I in no way want to speak on behalf of them, but if you look at, like, Navajo Nation, if one of their generating stations that they received money for tax dollars from closes, that's 30-40% of revenues, right? So then, as a conservation community, where I think we failed is that we failed to include community development and economic development as a core piece to conservation. We want to ask people to make choices to support something on conservation based on principle alone. Well, other wealthy people say, we've already got our wallet full of cash. Now we can make really good choices about conservation, when there are communities in Houston that are subject to exposure to petrochemicals, PFAS, PM 2.5, all those things that are coming with petrochemical processing and oil and gas development, and say, well, make this choice, but also give up your job or give up the opportunity to provide for your family. And I think that is one of the biggest failures of the conservation communities, that we have not seriously taken in the intersectionality between community development, economic development, and conservation, right? We have a team at the Grand Canyon Trust, Just Transition. I don't know if they're in the house. Wilda Anagel, she's here. Jessica Stego, I think she's here as well. They run our Just Transition program at the Grand Canyon Trust. And we do just that. They're great leaders in their space, but I would tell you these are difficult things to do, because we've left out the key point of just transition is what, right? Taking a community that is impacted negatively by these operations and making it one that is not subject to those same impacts and has an economic future. That's a tough thing to do. We're doing it at scale, but I think there's a lot there to do. And I would encourage everyone here to not in any way discount the fact that community development should be part of our work. And we shouldn't be told, when other conservation organs say that's not what we do, that's steering us away from we're actually getting to a solution. So I encourage you to, I mean, if there's anything we can do to have a conversation afterwards, certainly would be open to that. So thank you.
And I wanted to point out, I heard you say you were, it made you mad and frustrated to think about it. And I think we need to leverage those toxico feelings towards something more positive. And, like, let's not be mad and frustrated. Let's start taking some of these fun jobs like river guide. You go on a river in New Mexico, it's all privileged, nice white folks that are teaching us about our rivers. And it's like, hey man, that's a nice job. It's seasonal. They hang out all day. And it's like, where are we in those jobs that you just hang out at the river all day? That's a good antidote to being mad and frustrated all the time.
And feel your feelings. It's fine.
I have one other outlet for those feelings. You're sitting next to Addie, who has season tickets to the Nationals, and you're from Houston, so I assume you might like the Astros. So you could just like argue for a very long time. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Can you give a thunderous applause for our panel? Louder, louder. They were so good. Now just for Jerry. Can you guys stay for a photo? So we got a 10-minute break right now, and then we're going to do our breakout rooms again. I've got breakout room A is reclaiming the legacy, forging equity and private land conservation. And then the other one is in B, which is more than acres, ensuring effective and equitable conservation beyond 30 by 30 in ocean people, and coastal stewardship. All right, thanks everybody. And then that we have what time? 5? 6? Hold on, I have it in Hoover, 5:30. There is a People of Color Caucus happy hour. I believe it's just out here on the deck after these sessions. So everybody go get your blankets and your parkas and go enjoy those freezing rooms over there. Let's take a photo. Good job, guys. So, hey.